I see we have some people in already. So yeah, I think we're gonna
Great.
get started. So anyway, welcome. Hey everyone. My name is Sam. I am Payzaar's head of marketing. Thank you so much for joining us today. The session we're doing today, as you know, is titled "Why You Don't Need an Aggregator to Get Global Payroll Right." I think that's a little bit of a provocative title, and that's maybe what we're going to try to do today is be a little bit provocative and try to, present a different vision of how you can implement or how you can do global payroll successfully. Before we get started, I wanted to run through a couple of housekeeping items. The session is being recorded. All our sessions are recorded, and you can find them all on YouTube on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in our past webinars, you can go there and you can see them all. And of course, after we finish the session, we'll be sending it out to you. So if you have colleagues or your boss or whoever who is interested in the Payzaar model because you're looking into doing potentially a payroll transformation project, then you could share this with them. The second thing is we like to make this quite interactive. You'll see at the bottom of the screen, you have a Q&A tab. You're welcome to ask questions at any time, pop them in there. We will try to pick them up as we go along. If the topic of the question is not what we're talking about at the moment, then we'll get to them at the end of the session where we'll have a dedicated Q&A. And Fabian, why don't you introduce yourself before we get started?
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. So first of all, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining from. My name is Fabian. I've joined Payzaar 6.5, 7 months ago, and I'm pretty much responsible here for sales. And as Sam was saying, today we're discussing a little bit, comparing this two different options that exist on the market, just to better understand exactly what is happening in the world of payroll and what the options are, right? So looking forward to receiving your questions, looking forward to just keeping this as as open as possible in terms of having a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Great. So to get started, the first thing I want to talk about is what do we mean when we say global payroll, right? I think global payroll, it's not processing. Global payroll is the system of controls, the processes, the procedures you have that determine how you manage your international payroll. So global payroll isn't necessarily about your providers. It's more about operating at scale and with a high degree of standardization with strong centralized governance that covers your entire payroll landscape. The way I think about it is if it takes you more than a few hours to generate a report for one of your stakeholders, pulling data from lots of different countries, then you don't have global payroll. Then you have lots of local payrolls that are not connected, that are fragmented. So the global aspect of it really is not how you calculate, how you process. It's the system of governance that goes on top, I think. Fabian, would you add anything to that?
No, I absolutely agree. I think in the end, global payroll also stands for a very insightful process when it comes down to you managing all the resources available from all the different data sources, right? And the way that I've recently, and for me, I will always be using examples and organizations that I have dealt with. A recent one was the fact that, they were working with multiple payroll providers. And as you were mentioning earlier, bringing different data sources under a single report, ensuring that, these different outputs were sort of communicating using the same language. That was a challenge, right? And that was obviously opening and paving the road to a lot of errors. So I very much agree. And again, I think it's just about ensuring the fact that different data sources are communicating efficiently, enabling you, whatever your role is, enabling you to access data and better understand, the data that you have in front of you. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So why don't you need an aggregator to do this, right? In the past, the way to have standardization, to have strong centralized governance, typically was to outsource to one or maybe a few different providers, right? If I have a one-stop shop for my payroll, then by definition, everything is going to be consolidated. Everything is going to be standardized. And when something goes wrong, I'm going to have one neck that I can strangle, right? In theory. In theory, that's how it should work. In practice, it's not quite like that. So anyone that has worked with aggregators extensively will know that the quality of service can vary widely from one instance to another. And the way that aggregators are able to deliver at the scale that they need to is by adopting a very much kind of one size fits all approach. What this means, and I've heard this directly from some of our customers and some of our friends, is that a lot of people, payroll leadership roles, when they're working with aggregators, the feeling they have is that you are working for the aggregator as opposed to the aggregator working for you, right? In one of our episodes of Plug and Pay, we did an interview with Katinka Slifers. If you don't know Plug and Pay is our global payroll themed talk show, and I'll recommend that you check that out. But anyway, so we did an interview with Katinka Slifers. Katinka is a global payroll leader, practitioner, and now she works on the consulting side at Payroll Minds. And we were talking about process optimization, and how to optimize your process, how to build better processes, basically. And she said something that really resonated with me, which was, you shouldn't be fighting against your processes, right? You need to think differently, you need to act differently, and you have to have your processes working for you instead of against you. And this really resonated with me because it's very true in business in general, not only in payroll. It's very, very typical. I find that we build up processes and we build systems because we want to have governance, because we want to have control, because we want to have a clear way of doing things so we can measure our performance and our results. And what ends up happening often is that I feel like I'm fighting against the processes because the processes are natural to me. So instead of fitting into a nice little box comfortably, snugly, et cetera, I'm trying to jam myself into this process box. And it shouldn't be like that, really, right? So getting back to the question of why you don't need an aggregator, the answer is that now you can accomplish the same thing an aggregator could give you, which is consolidation, standardization, and control with technology. You don't have to do BPO, you don't have to do outsourcing, and that allows you to escape certain trade-offs that are inherent in the model, right? This is possible because technology has come a very long way since aggregators were born. And the centralized governance, the automation of processes, and all these kinds of things, you can do them with software nowadays, basically. Fabian, would you like to add anything?
No, I was just listening, and I was just thinking of the fact that I'm into technology, and I think we all are. We're using technology as we speak right now, right? And holding this webinar, and the fact that technology is so present in our lives has kind of allowed us to better understand and just agree that there are new ways. There are new ways of managing different operations, right? And it can be business, payroll related, life related, but mainly going back to the traditional aggregator myself, because I've worked at ADP for 4 years. I wouldn't want to say there's a good way and a bad way to manage payroll, but there are just new ways, and technology, as you were saying, has evolved so much, and there's so many advantages to making a good use of it. And I cannot wait, of course, to explore the next few slides and go through some of those advances, some of the main differences in between, the traditional aggregator and using, for example, a SaaS or PaaS, in our case, platform as a service approach, and how you can make the best use of that, right?
Okay. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and talk about what the advantages and what the differences are in these approaches?
Absolutely. So discussing a little bit about some of the main, let's say, pillars to, for when an organization is deciding to make a change, usually the change is very slow, right? And there's a reason why that's change is happening at a very slow paced rhythm, right? First of all, time to value. And if we stop here for a second, we know that changing a payroll landscape is very, very time consuming. You need to allocate a lot of resources towards it, right? And that, going back to what you were saying, Sam, technology has now changed the game. Because if we're looking at any traditional aggregator, let's say, we could obviously use examples, real life scenarios of these things projects that I have experienced. Let's take a company that has, probably 10 countries, something that has happened recently in one of my projects, 10 countries, 9 different providers. And that means 9 different systems, 9 different sources, right? And making a change from that point, of course, you could go to, with a SaaS or platform as a service approach, in this case with what we are offering at Payzaar, or the traditional aggregator. So I know for a fact that for 10 countries, 9 systems, they've received a implementation time from one of the traditional aggregators. There was pretty much looking like this: 12 months of implementation, depending on, of course, on some of the slots. So as you probably know, traditional aggregators are enabling you to go live within certain countries, depending on how much volume they have, right? So they basically allocate go live slots from, depending on how busy their partners are, right? And going back to the main pillar, time to value, with us using technology in general, right? But especially with Payzaar, there is a very short time to implement. There's a reason for that, right? So we've enabled through technology, we have a few features available where you can map the data, where you can connect and basically tell the platform, tell our engine, this information, this specific data set or this column should be translated from now on as, A, and so on and so forth. Once you're done with that process, the system will always know how to read that input, right? The data, the variable data are changing on a monthly basis. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to shorten that process. So going back to time to value, instead of implementing a 10 country payroll operations, 9 providers in 12 months, we're trying to achieve that in 1 to 3 months, right? So 4 to 12 weeks. That, of course, translates into a lot of time to value because we're unlocking resources, not just in your organization, but on our side as well, right? Because we're capable to deliver more volume. And obviously, the technology that we're using is just doing a good job at managing the relationship that we have. Cost, moving on from time to value. Sorry about that. So where we're discussing about costs, obviously we're a technology provider, right? We're not a service provider. Now we do have options, and that's why we're going to discuss about flexibility, but we are a technology-driven company, and the platform as a service that we're offering is enabling you to connect all the local outputs that you currently have, right, to our system, and our system will translate the information so that you can better understand what's happening from a global perspective, right? So on a monthly basis, all the gross to net files are being uploaded within the system. The system, during implementation, of course, will map all that data. The system will know how to read it, gather all together, and then, of course, there are numerous advantages to that. First of all, you're consolidating the data, and from that point, reporting and analytics, for example, is something that obviously will occur naturally, to say so. So going back to the costs, we're clearly reducing the costs from not just directly impacting them, but also indirectly. Why? Because we're unlocking more resources from a workforce perspective, right? Instead of having someone allocated towards a project for 12 months or multiple people, from our side, and of course we could get into more details and discuss about the way we implement through the self-enablement approach, meaning we're teaching you how to implement yourself, which is again, of course, translating long-term into reducing costs. Moving forward to the last but not least, flexibility. We've discussed a bit about the traditional aggregator approach. And we know that the traditional aggregator is basically either having offices in certain countries or partners. Now, the solutions that you're currently contracting through a traditional aggregator, they're local payroll solutions. They're not global payroll solutions. However, you're being charged for them as if they were global payroll solutions, right? Through our approach, SaaS PaaS approach, we can enable you, we can put you in touch with local payroll providers without adding any margin on top of their services. It is a win-win situation. They're happy because using our technology, they can retain international clients, and we're happy because our technology is being used. What that translates to is flexibility, meaning, let's say that there are two, let's say, parallel universes, and you're signing with both traditional aggregator and a SaaS solution. And after a few months, you realize that the service is just not working well in Greece, let's say, and you'd like to make some changes there, right? So going back to flexibility, Well, there are not a lot of options. That partner in Greece might be tied to your contract with the global traditional aggregator, and probably you don't even have the option to reach out to him directly, right? Because you have a dedicated global point of contact from the traditional aggregator. You'll have to reach out there. He will have to escalate, and so on and so forth, right? With a SaaS approach, so with Payzaar in this case, you could replace selectively your partners depending on the changes that you would like to make. So let's say that you have payroll operations in 10 countries. 2 of them are just not performing very well, and you would like to replace those in-country providers. The market is open. You can obviously search and find yourself an ICP that fits your organization, your needs, or you could reach out to Payzaar, and we could recommend you and put you in touch, of course, with some of the payroll providers that we have completed projects with, and we'll let you to take it from there, and you'll decide what works best for you. So there are a lot of options. There are a lot of advantages that we could mention, but when we're discussing about time to value, costs, and flexibility, we're using technology to drive this pillars, to drive them in the right direction, right? Time to value, unlock more time so that you can get more value. Costs, obviously we're reducing costs, again, leveraging technology. And flexibility, well, you have so many different options. Actually, as a matter of fact, first of all, we're non-disruptive. We're not making any changes. It is actually, Sam, and I've said it before in some of the calls that I'm having, it is so, I find it almost awkward explaining what we do, because we're changing everything without making any changes, right? If an organization is working with multiple payroll providers, we're adding ourselves on top of that ecosystem as a layer of technology, right? Connecting those local outputs that I was mentioning earlier, but we're not changing anything. We're not touching anything, right? We're just enhancing what you have. And it's so hard to say, are you ready to make a change within the payroll or your payroll space? And they're like, well, we're not ready to make a change. Like, well, actually, we're not making any changes, right? But we are making changes in one way or another. So yeah, this is from my side. This is what I believe, as I was saying at the beginning of my speech, is I don't think there's a good or a bad way. There are just different ways. And there are companies that are happy outsourcing everything and not dealing with anything at all. But if you want flexibility, if you want time to value, if you want the ability to access and receive insights about your global payroll, if you want to have unlimited reporting, right? There obviously our open approach, and I could just sort of drift away for a second here. Give one example. With a traditional aggregator, at least back when I was at ADP, right? We were offering 13 different standard reports through our global payroll solution. Right? Anything else was possible, but it was an add-on, right? And the add-on is something that you pay for, right? So because we are a technology company, not a service, a payroll service firm, with us, the options are unlimited, right? You can, as long as the data is there and it's coming from different sources, it's already there, it's been translated, you decide how you want your report to look like. And again, you save that template, you rerun it on a monthly basis. It will collect all the data available from the latest payroll cycle. And there you go, in a matter of seconds, clicks, you'll just have access to the latest, data or customized report that you are seeking.
Yeah. There's one thing I would add to this, which I think falls kind of on the cost side, but it actually goes into other areas too. Which is the cost of implementation. So time to value obviously is how fast you can get implemented. Cost is how much it's going to cost to use a solution, and there's the intersection of how much it's going to cost to actually implement. So if you're running a traditional payroll transformation project, the cost of implementation is going to be 5 figures at the very least. It's probably going to be 6 figures. That can be a decent chunk of money. The way we do it, or the way you can do it, if you have a software-led approach where you're focusing on self-enablement, that brings down the cost quite a bit. What does that mean? That means that there's going to be a little bit more work at the beginning. We're going to front load some of the work, but the focus is going to be on enabling the payroll team to own the solution. So your team is going to learn how to use the solution. Your team is going to learn how to set up the solution. And that means you're going to be able to create new countries. You're going to be able to set up new pay groups. You're going to be able to change your data model, your columns, and you're going to be able to map your data however you want. And yeah, so you're front loading a little bit of the work there, but that brings down the cost, that makes it faster. And it gives you a lot more control and autonomy moving forward.
Absolutely, Sam. And to add on something, to add with one more sentence, we're always here, right? Like we have the self-enablement, self-service approach where we're teaching one of your employees, what we refer to as user or super user, how to implement, how to scale, how to add new countries, how to remove countries, right? However, at the same time, we are here. If you need support, if you need to reach out, if you need assistance, we're always here, right? We're just guaranteeing the fact that you'll be able to do it yourself at your own pace and with your own resources. Right?
Yeah. I see we have a question in the chat, and Remy is asking, can you clarify which company you refer to when you mention aggregators? I think, well, we've mentioned one company by name, and I don't want to talk about competitors by name, but I think you can get who we're talking about based on the model and who we're discussing. That's what I would say.
Absolutely.
So how do these models differ from each other in the actual day-to-day? So how does it work in the day-to-day if you're operating with an aggregator model versus if you're operating with a software-driven PaaS or SaaS approach? Do you want to go ahead?
Absolutely. So everything is evolving, first of all, to say, right? The traditional aggregator is also evolving, right? It's trying to change the way they service their clients. It's trying to add new features to what they currently have to keep up with, with currently is challenging within the space, right? Challenges that, as we always say, right, like new solutions to old challenges, because payroll hasn't changed much. And the fact that it hasn't changed much doesn't mean that the actual way payroll is being operating hasn't changed. Right now we have different ERPs. Now we have different sources, more sources than before, right? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to leverage data. We live now in 2022 where we're trying to just consolidate and centralize as much information as possible. So if we're looking at what the difference is between the traditional aggregator and what on a daily basis, what's happening, how is that affecting you as a user, right? Well, we'll have to look a little bit, go a little bit in the past and think about it, or at least this is how I see it. If we are a company that has been founded in 2016. And obviously the fact that we've been on the market for 6.5 years now has allowed us to be modern, to add features and functionalities that are reflecting, modern issues, modern challenges, right? That are adapted to modern businesses. And I always say that, a company that has been on the market for a while obviously has a lot of advantages, right? Especially resources, or at least should have. But it is very, very hard, especially if someone that understands a little bit the space of technology, right? Coding and programming and developing new features. It is so hard to add new features on top of old infrastructure, right? And this model pretty much applies everywhere, like even in constructions, right? You sometimes keep the foundation, you make some changes, and you make the building look quite attractive, but eventually you'll have to change the structure and the foundation. So how do these models differ from each other in day to day? Well, first of all, at least I can come up again with real examples, right? Not just theory. Service and service escalations. So one of the issues with the traditional aggregator was the fact that you do not have a lot of control when it comes down to escalating, asking for support. And I was using an example earlier saying 10 countries, 9 different systems. But if let's say you have 10 countries and you're with just one provider, the traditional aggregator. Usually what the traditional aggregator, and there are quite a few companies, and I mean, we could mention a few, there's no point. The top 5 players within the space, to say so, what they're doing is they're advertising themselves as, a single point of contact. So anything that you need, you'll get a dedicated single point of contact that will understand your business, will know exactly what your current scope is, and so on and so forth. What actually happens and ends up happening is you open a ticket through a ticketing system. That person is receiving your ticket, your issue. They will reach out as your global point of contact to the in-country partner and try to find a solution for that. So what I'm trying to say is they're reaching out, they're waiting for them to get back to them for the in-country support contact to get back to your dedicated account manager or service relationship manager, depending on how the role is called. And then they will get back to you with sort of the final resolution for that specific ticket. And you end up having a lot of tickets that are just not being answered. So going back, service and service escalations, right? With the PaaS approach, platform as a service approach, everything is open. You have an issue in Thailand, you will reach out to the partner in Thailand and ask for support, right? And guess what? If they don't get back to you, right? If they don't offer support, or if they do, but you're just not happy with it, and it happens the second time, third time, well, you can replace that partner. But something will happen because they know exactly that this is an open approach and not a traditional aggregator. They will do their best to ensure very good support because they know that they can get replaced, right? And it happens a lot of times. I've had numerous conversations where, our clients were like, oh, I've reached out and escalated, and the service is great, and we've had issues in the past, and well, you're not going to have issues, because if you're going to have issues, then it's almost natural selection. Seriously, it is in the market, right? Like if you don't do a good job, well, your competitors will do a good job, and you'll just you'll disappear. It is just a matter of time, right? And they know that. They know that the space is open to say so. So that's one difference: service, support, and escalations. Right. Another advantage to our model is the fact that, or our model, technology in general, is the fact that technology is capable of understanding different specific requirements. Right. So going back to what I was saying, add-ons. Add-ons is when you basically request something that, it's just a specific request that you need. Perhaps your CFO on a weekly basis wants to have a report that's just containing, I don't know, bonuses in Germany and Switzerland that are above 3,000 euros, right? Now you could play with the data yourself, right? Export everything, play in Excel. We've all been there, done that. But what if that's happening on a weekly basis, and you want to make sure that the results that you're gathering are not very, but 100% accurate. So what you do is you just create a custom report. Well, with us, again, as I was saying before, like 10 minutes ago, you can create unlimited reports, exactly what you need. All right, no mistakes, no errors, no, absolutely no. And going back to time to value, thinking of two different things at once, is a matter of clicks, right? So if we're discussing about time to value, it is happening instantly. Traditional aggregator, however, that's an add-on. Anything that you need and hasn't been offered to you within within the sort of main discussions, main offering from the beginning of the contract that you've had pre-signing, it's an add-on. And yes, it can be done, but you'll pay for it. And more importantly, is you'll have to wait for it, right? So an add-on can take 3 weeks to 6 months, depending on what is needed, right? Perhaps you need some customization, so on and so forth, right? It can be an extra button that you would like to see, right? Third, agility. The fact that you're able to selectively deploy our modules, it is enabling you to remain agile. That in combination with the fact that you can selectively replace your partners, it really enables you to have a superpower, right? Because you can control everything. And that's what we're trying to do through our technology. We're trying to ensure the fact that if something doesn't work, you will be able to take control, take ownership. But in order to take control, you need to understand what is happening, and that's what we are doing. That's what we're gathering for you, right? We're gathering all this data so that you can better understand what is happening, where it's happening, and of course, enabling you, as I was saying, to remain agile, right? To make the changes where you have to make changes. And last but not least, I would say scalability. So the ability to scale, going back to the way we implement and the self-service, self-enablement, the fact that you can go and add countries yourself, that can only enable for again all those pillars that we've mentioned before: time to value, flexibility, but scalability, right? And to give you an example, as a traditional aggregator, if you would like to go live in a new country, that is an LOA, and so a letter of amendment to the main contract, and that LOA is very much dependent on the in-country provider or partner that traditional aggregator has. In other words, if you reach out saying, we would like to go live in March this year, chances are 8 out of 10 times they'll get back to you saying, we do not have a slot for March. However, we do have a slot for July. And you'll say, well, July doesn't work because our fiscal year, wherever you are, starts in March. And that's the reason why we've decided, we need to move fast. And I've seen so many different projects that just missed their go live date because of that, right? So with us, it is a matter of click. Add new country, gather the data, map the data with the gross to net file from that specific country, and then that's it. You've added a new country onto your global payroll system.
Yep. I actually have a question. I have a question in the Q&A tab right now from Remy, and Remy's asking, will you guys showcase the different modules and functionalities you offer? And the answer is yes, not today, because that's not the goal of this session, but we run live demo sessions every month. We actually have one 2 weeks from now where we're going to be doing that. And we also have recordings of our past live demo sessions. So if you want access to those, you can send us an email. You can go to our website and you can submit a contact form or send us a message on social media, and I'll send that to you. Not a problem. And going back to what Fabian was saying, I would add one more thing, focusing kind of like on the day-to-day, on the day-to-day differences you're going to have. If you have more of a technology-driven approach versus an aggregator approach, there's a difference in cycle times. There's a difference in cycle times and cutoff dates. Very direct. You're working directly with a local provider and country. You don't have to go through different layers of bureaucracy to transmit data and to have data flow back and forth. That gives you a lot more flexibility. We have a customer that went with us, among other reasons, because we gave them cutoff dates that were later in the month, which gave them significantly more time to prepare things, so their people didn't have to do as much overtime and they weren't as stressed out. They had a lot more flexibility. So that's one of the very, very tangible things. I think we can move on and we can talk a little bit about what it actually looks like, what the system looks like, what the infrastructure looks like, right? If you've been to any of our other webinars, or if you have seen our content, you might have heard about us talk about this before. We've come up with a concept which we like to call the global payroll control layer. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of what global payroll really is. It's not processing. Global payroll is having control, right? So the typical payroll landscape of a multinational is going to look kind of like what you see down here, right? Some companies have everything consolidated. Some companies have only one provider, or maybe they have a couple. But in most cases, most companies, they have a mix of different providers. So they're going to have a provider for LATAM. They're going to have a provider. They're going to have one or a few providers for Europe. They're going to have one for South Asia, for India. If you're based in the US, then maybe you're doing the US in-house, because that's how you started out and that's how things developed essentially. And the issue with doing things this way is that you have fragmentation, right? So if you have different providers in different countries, and Fabian was talking about this a little bit earlier, what's going to happen is your data is going to look different in every place. The structure of your data and your data model is going to be different. The columns in your spreadsheets are going to be different. The processes that you use to manage each of these providers are going to be different also, because their workflow is not going to be exactly the same. The inputs they're going to require are not going to be exactly the same, right? So you have this, generally you have this fragmentation where things are kind of split up. And the result of that is that everything gets siloed, right? So you don't have one lake of data for everything. You have your country data in each country, your processes in each country, right? When everything is siloed like that, you can't audit your processes as well. You can't optimize them as well. And it's harder to have that kind of global perspective of everything that is going on, basically. And finally, this means that it's much harder to have good integration between payroll with HR and finance systems, because you're not pulling data or serving data from one system, you're pulling and serving data from lots of different regional subsystems. So the answer to that, and this is what we've built here, is software. We've built a layer of software that can sit on top of this, on top of your local payrolls and your local payroll systems. And it has the capability to consume data from any local payroll engine, from any provider. It can parse the information. And then what it does is it's going to homogenize that. So instead of you having your Brazil, US, Spain, Germany, Poland, Netherlands, India data, what you're going to have is one global, data format for everything. And it's the same with it's also the same with your workflow. So instead of having a different workflow for each country, you're going to have a global workflow, and all of your providers work with the same workflow. So it's much easier to optimize, to measure how things are going, et cetera, et cetera. The outcome of that is what you get up above. Your processes are standardized. You have centralized governance because you're operating the same everywhere, and the inputs and the outputs you're generating everywhere are the same. Of course, that allows you to introduce more automation. That allows you to actually have consolidated global reporting because you have all of your payroll data in the same format. And of course, that also facilitates integration between payroll and HR and finance. Fabian, would you?
Absolutely. No, I very much agree. I was just thinking from a an outside perspective, at least in some of the calls that I'm having, lots of people are asking, okay, they understand what we do, what we are, but how are we achieving that? And I think it's very much, I think, our superpower, among others, but the main superpower is the fact that we can just connect these different data sources, use the system, and the system, the system is a polyglot, speaks so many languages, right? And it just, that's how I see it, and it just connects so well everything. And because we have variable data, non-variable data on a monthly basis, we can tell the system exactly what is coming, recurringly speaking, right? And the system will just know exactly how to translate everything. And I think this is the easiest explanation for what's currently on the screen. We're in the middle. We are that GPCL, right? We're Payzaar, we're green. And what's below that, it is the reality of many organizations. It really is, right? It is not a scenario that makes us look good. Right? It is, again, what's happening in probably 7, 8 out of 10 organizations, if not more. And we've used examples, 10 countries, 9, but we've had cases with 45, 50, 60 countries and 40 systems. Now, just logging into 40 different systems can be challenging, right? And so on and so forth. So I think it is almost self-explanatory, right? But I just wanted to add this explanation on what I think our superpower is and how we are able to achieve and move all this data from below to the surface.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to emphasize. I think if you had to break it down to a single point, what I would say is that it's data, it's format agnostic, meaning it can consume anything and parse it and become essentially a system of record for that. That's kind of like the one thing I would focus on if I had to summarize it. This is just kind of a side-by-side comparison we put together. We've been talking about all the really, really great stuff and all the really cool stuff so far. And obviously I'm partial to, I'm partial because we're part of Payzaar. But there are two things that I would like to mention that I think are interesting, that are the trade-offs, basically. And these are the last two items you're going to see on the list, which are hands-on and multiple providers and contracts, right? So we already talked about faster implementation. Your cost is going to be lower. It's more flexible. You can change providers. It's modular, so you can implement specific parts of the solution and not just the whole thing if that's what you want to do. But there are two trade-offs in this, which are that it's more hands-on. What that means is you're going to have to manage your providers yourself if you go for a software-driven model, right? You don't have an account manager who is your one neck to strangle. You have that direct relationship with your providers. That means that it is a little bit more hands-on. For some people, they don't like that, but for others, actually, that's welcome because that means that you have more direct communication and it's more agile and you speed up your escalations and stuff like that. So
Sam,
it's not a net negative. Sorry, go ahead.
apologies, just to add something exactly on this topic that
Okay.
you've mentioned.
Go ahead.
And again, and probably there are people in the audience that have experienced this. So, or they either have experienced or will experience. I've had cases where people were saying, like, especially again, with the traditional aggregator, where people were saying like, oh, we would like to contract a global payroll solution. However, we've had very good relationships with two of our providers, one in Austria and the other one in Canada, right? And we all know behind payroll, there are people, right? And people build relationships. And I've had a very open conversation with one of our clients, and they said, look, I've been working with this payroll provider for 8 years and from Canada, and we're friends. Like, we start conversations discussing about, I don't know, kids in kindergarten, right? And then we discuss about payroll and issues and so on and so forth. And how can we keep those partners? That was a challenge, right? People connect with people, right? Of course, we can connect to data as well, but mainly we connect to humans, connect to humans. And they were trying to retain that relationship that they've built in 8 years, that trust, that, the fact that they could be open with one to another. And that's what we're offering, right? We're enabling you to keep the relationships that you have, if you want to keep them. If you want to replace them, we can do that as well, right? That's all I wanted to add.
Okay. No, yeah, going back to what I was saying, yeah, so it is a little bit more hands-on because you have that direct relationship with your providers. That means that there is a little bit more work to be done in that area, but of course that also has some advantages we've discussed. And then the last point I would bring up in the comparison that I think is very different, aside from what we've been talking about up until now, is that you're going to have multiple contracts in those cases. So instead of having a single contract for your entire global service, you're going to have contracts with whoever your different in-country providers are. If for whatever reason your organization says, no, I want to have one contract, there are some things that we can do to facilitate that. But generally speaking, you're going to have contracts with different providers. This is not necessarily a negative thing. If it is your ongoing situation at present, then it's not a change, but it's just something to keep in mind. And I think to wrap up, what I would like to do is we can actually talk about a couple customer cases. Yeah. So Blue Prism is a robotic process automation firm. They're based in the UK. They are, I guess, what you would call a late stage or a very mature startup company. They've been around for a few years now. They've grown quite a bit. And we've been working with them since 2019. They came to us because they had a very particular payroll situation. They had a lot of fragmentation, basically, in their payroll landscape. They had a bunch of different providers running different countries, and then they had a few that they were running in-house. And they had talked to some aggregators, and they said, we want to keep certain countries in-house because we want to have better control. And that wasn't really compatible with the aggregator offering because it would mean that they would have essentially two separate systems that were not really speaking to each other, basically. So they really wanted to maintain that hybrid environment of in-house and outsourced at the same time. And they had an issue also with auditability and compliance because they were lacking that centralized governance, basically, because they had lots of domestic payrolls or local payrolls instead of one global payroll environment. We started working with them in 2019. And one of the highlights of this is that through the self-enablement approach that we adopted with them, we implemented the first 2 or 3 countries together. So our team did it with them. We showed them how it worked. We set up the countries, we set up the pay groups. We showed them how to configure their data model, how to map their data, all that kind of stuff. And then once they understood that, they took over the implementation themselves and they ran it. And the result of that is that they got the whole thing up and running in 4 weeks, which is very, very fast. And also, of course, it comes at a much lower cost than having your implementation done by someone else. When I spoke to Stuart, who was their global payroll manager, and I interviewed him to learn a little bit about his experiences and stuff like that, he emphasized a few different points. One of them was that their reporting was much easier. So they're saving essentially hundreds of hours a year on reporting tasks now, because all their data is consolidated in the system as opposed to having all the different local data silos. And he used an expression that I really like to describe this, which is that Payzaar has become essentially a system of record for them. It's the system of record for HR data, almost for HR data or HR financial data in the organization. And when they started out, the only people who were using it were the payroll team. And now I think they have between 20 and 25 different users, and it's being used by people in finance, by people in rewards, and by people in accounting as well. So it's kind of spread out through the organization because people have realized, hey, the data we have here is really top quality. It's really accurate. We can use it for lots of different things, basically. And the other case I would mention, whoops, I skipped one. There you go, sorry. The other case I'd like to mention is Fagron. Fagron is a large biopharmaceutical company. They have, I think, 3,000 employees. They're present in, I want to say 25 countries. I'm trying to remember right now. And they had a very similar situation. Correct. So they were very fragmented. Every country was running basically independently. In a lot of cases, they actually had non-specialized people running their payroll. So they had HR people running their payroll working with a local ICP. And the result of this is that they had no standardization. Their processes and workflows were different in every place. They didn't have global reporting, of course, because they had data in 30 different formats, basically. And there was an issue, which is they wanted to fix this, but leadership was very clear. And we don't want to rip out everything. We don't want to do a full rip and replace of everything, of all of our systems, because the payroll that is being delivered by their providers was actually good quality, right? So if you do a full rip and replace, that increases the cost, that adds more risk, et cetera. So they wanted a solution that could basically overlay on top of that, a software solution that could give them that standardization and that consolidation without having to change everything. And yeah, the outcomes is that we're still implementing, we're still working with them right now. And basically what they have now is that all their systems are connected, all their local payrolls are connected through the platform. So they have that standardized data. They have global reporting because all their data is in a single format. And they've built all that on top of their existing systems. So they haven't had to replace any of their local providers, but they have global payroll now through a software layer, basically. And I think we are coming up on time now. Yeah, we're coming up on time now, so maybe we have a few minutes and we take some questions if anyone has any questions for us. Oh, I see one. Okay. You mentioned something about, you mentioned a case of using reporting only earlier, and we're talking about modularity and stuff like that. Yeah. So we talked about modularity a little bit and about the flexibility of the solution. One of the things you could do is, you can implement specific modules, right? So we have a reporting module, we have integration solutions for HR and for finance, we have the workflow control part, and then we have the part that is employee self-service. So hosting pay slips and tax documents and stuff like that. All of these things can be implemented independently, and reporting specifically is one that actually does get implemented independently quite a bit. So we have quite a few clients who only want reporting because they already have their payroll system set up. They're happy with the way it's working, but they don't have the flexibility or the capacity to build the types of reports or to consolidate data to the level they would like. So there's an example, which we have one of our customers, they have 20,000 employees. They're present in 60 countries, so very large organization. And they only use us for reporting and for finance integration. So they have their payroll providers, they have their systems, but they were lacking on that reporting piece. So what we do is we sit on top of their existing systems. We consume the data from all of those systems. We parse it and we convert it into a unified format. and then it sits in Payzaar as a system of record. And from that, they can build reports and they can serve data to different stakeholders in the organization, like the chief accounting officer, the CFO, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. I see another one. Is this compatible with an aggregator? Can you integrate with an aggregator payroll only with individual ICPs? Okay, that's an interesting one. So yes, actually, that is something that can be done. We have some customers that are working with different aggregators regionally, for example. So they have an aggregator that provides them service for North America and one for Europe. And they want to have the software layer, for example, to do integration with, payroll to finance or payroll to HR or reporting. And yeah, so we can consume the data that you would get that would be output by an aggregator. It's data like any other kind of data. As long as the data is normal, we can work with it independently of who the provider is.
And something to add on top of that, Sam, is the fact that, so for example, if you're seeking to, let's say you're currently working with a traditional aggregator, right? And you'd like to connect with us, we can do that. But in the future, and this is very nice to obviously to know, it doesn't really affect what current, past, future landscape, payroll landscape you'll have in place. We integrate, right? As Sam would say.
We have another one here, which is, what is the average implementation timeline? Is it depending on the size and complexity in countries and scope? Fabian, I think you could take this one. Maybe,
sure, no? Absolutely. So Ilanka, it very much, you're very right. It very much depends on the size, complexity, different entities. So for example, first of all, headcount, right? Then of course, we're looking at countries, depending on, the complexities that you have and what setup you have in place. For example, we've had companies where, on a monthly basis, they did not have a lot of variable data. So I'm talking here, some employees we've had cases where employees were just working on lots of bonuses, lots of changes, right? So that obviously requires a bit more work, right? Then of course, multiple entities per country. So in most countries or most organizations, they have 1-2 entities per country. But we've had cases where they've had 7, 8, 10 entities, pay groups, right? Per country, which again resulted in a more complex implementation and management of the data, right? So yes, there's a range, and it very much depends on countries, payroll complexity, headcount, and of course anything else that you would like to have, right?
Yeah. Of course, it's going to vary on a case-by-case basis because no two payrolls are alike. Basically, every company has, a different system and different environment and different requirements and everything. But basically, as a ballpark, what we'll say is the scale is going to be weeks to months as opposed to months to years. That's the difference. So if it's a relatively simple project, it's something that you're going to be able to execute on a scale of a few weeks to a few months. But generally, it's almost always going to be under a year in time. That's what I would say. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Since we don't have any more, I think we're going to wrap up here. As I said at the beginning, we recorded the session. We will share the video with you in case you want to rewatch it or share it with your colleagues. If you have any more questions or would like to learn more, you can contact us very, very easily through the website. As I said, we're also running a live demo session in a couple of weeks where we're going to do a guided platform overview. We'll talk about our functionality. We also have live demo sessions we've done in the past, and we can give you access to those recordings if you want them. And then the last thing I would say is if you haven't done it yet or you don't know it, you should check out our talk show, which is Plug and Pay, which is where it's a talk show where we bring on global payroll leaders and we interview them and ask them about their experiences, their learnings, and try to learn from them, basically. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Fabian, do you want to say anything, words of goodbye?
Well, absolutely. Thank you all for joining the session. Thanks for all the questions. And we're still here. This webinar is ending, but Payzaar.com is still there. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we're more than happy to assist.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Goodbye.
All right. Bye-bye.